Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. The scorching Florida sun beat down on the vibrant crowd streaming through the gates of Disney World. Excited chatter and laughter filled the air as families and friends eagerly entered the magical kingdom. Among the throng was a group of men and women in their mid-20s, decked out in matching Mickey Mouse t-shirts and mouse ear headbands. "I can't believe we're finally here," squealed Mia, bouncing on her toes. "It's been my dream since I was a little girl." Her enthusiasm was infectious, spreading to the rest of the group. All except for Nick, who hung back slightly, a forced smile plastered on his face. He tugged uncomfortably at the neckline of his shirt, feeling out of place among the sea of excited faces. "Come on, Nick! Where's your Disney spirit?" teased his friend Chris, slapping him on the back.
Yeah, I'm excited,"
Nick mumbled unconvincingly. In truth, he'd never quite understood the appeal of Disney. The princesses, the magic, the happily ever afters, it all felt fake and hollow to him, but he'd agreed to come along to make his friends happy. As they made their way down Main Street, USA, Nick found his gaze drawn to the colorful storefronts and cheerful cast members. Despite his reservations, he had to admit there was something charming about it all. The attention to detail was impressive, from the old-fashioned lampposts to the horse-drawn trolleys. Their first stop was Cinderella Castle, its gleaming spires reaching towards the cloudless sky. A meet and greet with princesses was taking place in the courtyard, drawing a crowd of excited children and their parents. "Oh my gosh, we have to go meet them!" Mia exclaimed, grabbing Nick's arm and pulling him towards the line. He stumbled along behind her, protesting weakly. "Do we really have to? It's just people in costumes." But his objections fell on deaf ears as they joined the queue. Nick shuffled his feet, feeling increasingly uncomfortable as they got closer to the front. He didn't know how to act around the princesses. What was he supposed to say? Finally, it was their turn. Cinderella herself stood before them, resplendent in her iconic blue gown. Her smile was dazzling as she greeted them. "Welcome to my castle. I'm so delighted you could join us today." While the others in the group chatted excitedly with Cinderella, Nick hung back, averting his eyes. But the princess noticed his discomfort and approached him directly. "And who might you be, my shy friend?" she asked gently.
Nick,"
he muttered, staring at his shoes. Cinderella tilted her head, studying him. "You seem troubled, Nick. Remember, even on the darkest nights, stars still shine. And the brightest star of all is the one inside you." Nick looked up, startled by her words. For a moment, he forgot she was just an actor in a costume. There was a knowing glint in her eye that made him wonder if she saw right through him. "Just be yourself," Cinderella continued softly. "That's the greatest magic of all." As they moved on to the next princess, Nick found himself mulling over Cinderella's words. Be yourself. But who was he, really? He'd never felt comfortable in his own skin, always playing a role he thought others expected of him. Throughout the day, Nick found himself paying more attention to the princesses they encountered. He noticed the grace with which they moved, the confident way they carried themselves, and he began to feel a stirring of something he couldn't quite name. As they waited in line for Space Mountain, Nick's gaze wandered to a group of young women nearby. They were laughing and taking selfies, their faces glowing with excitement. He found himself studying their outfits, the flowing sundresses, the delicate jewelry, the way their hair fell in soft waves. "Earth to Nick!" Chris's voice snapped him out of his reverie. "You've been spacing out all day, man. What's going on?" Nick shrugged, unable to articulate the confusing thoughts swirling in his mind.
"Just taking it all in, I guess."
As the day wore on, Nick found himself paying more attention to the women around him, not in a way he ever had before, but with a growing sense of curiosity and longing. He watched how they moved, how they laughed, how they expressed themselves. And with each observation, a small voice in the back of his mind grew louder. That evening, as fireworks exploded over the castle, painting the sky in a rainbow of colors, Nick stood apart from his friends. The day's experiences tumbled through his mind, along with Cinderella's words. Be yourself. But who was that, really? For the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge a truth he'd been burying for years. The discomfort he felt in his own body, the sense of wrongness that had plagued him for as long as he could remember, it all suddenly made sense. As the last sparks faded from the sky, Nick made a silent vow to himself. It was time to stop hiding, time to explore the person he truly was inside. The weeks following their Disney trip passed in a blur for Nick. He threw himself into research, spending hours online reading about gender identity and transgender experiences. The more he learned, the more certain he became that this was the path he needed to explore. But taking those first steps was terrifying. He started small, ordering a few items of women's clothing online. When the package arrived, he waited until his roommate was out before locking himself in his bedroom to try them on. With trembling hands, he slipped on a soft floral blouse. The fabric felt alien against his skin, but as he turned to look in the mirror, his breath caught in his throat. For the first time in his life, he felt a glimmer of recognition when he looked at his reflection. Encouraged by this small victory, Nick began to make subtle changes to his appearance. He grew out his hair, explaining to curious friends that he was just trying a new style. He started using moisturizer and took greater care with his skincare routine. One evening, while browsing makeup tutorials online, Nick heard his roommate's key in the lock. In a panic, he slammed his laptop shut and tried to look casual as Chris walked in.
Hey man, what's up?
Chris asked, flopping onto the couch. Not much, Nick replied, his heart racing.
Just, watching some videos?
Chris raised an eyebrow.
Anything interesting?
For a moment, Nick considered telling him the truth, but fear won out and he shook his head.
Nah, just killing time.
As the weeks turned into months, Nick's transformation continued in secret. He learned to contour his face with makeup, softening his jawline and accentuating his cheekbones. He ordered breast forms online and wore them under baggy sweatshirts, reveling in the feeling of having curves. But living a double life was taking its toll. Nick became withdrawn, avoiding social situations where he'd have to present as male. His friends noticed the change in his behavior and grew concerned. "Nick, what's going on with you lately?" Mia asked one day over coffee. "You've been so distant." Nick stared into his latte, his stomach churning. He wanted to tell her to unburden himself of this secret, but the words stuck in his throat.
I'm just going through some stuff,
he mumbled, trying to figure things out. Mia reached across the table and squeezed his hand.
You know you can talk to me about anything, right?
Nick nodded, fighting back tears. Soon, he promised himself. Soon he'd be ready to share his truth with the world. As spring turned to summer, Nick took the next big step in his journey. He made an appointment with a therapist who specialized in gender identity issues. Sitting in the waiting room, his leg bouncing nervously, he felt like he might be sick. But as soon as he started talking to Dr. Ramirez, the words came pouring out. All the confusion, the fear, the excitement of discovering his true self, it all came tumbling out in a rush. Dr. Ramirez listened patiently, offering supportive nods and gentle questions. By the end of the session, Nick felt lighter than he had in months.
What you're feeling is valid, Nick,
Dr. Ramirez said as their time came to a close. And there are many options available to help you on your journey. Have you thought about what name you'd like to use? Nick blinked, caught off guard by the question. He hadn't even considered choosing a new name. But as he thought about it, a memory surfaced. A princess from the Disney trip with flowing red hair and a fierce spirit. Ariel, he said softly. I think I'd like to be called Ariel. Dr. Ramirez smiled warmly.
It's wonderful to meet you, Ariel.
Hearing the name spoken aloud sent a thrill through Nick. No, through Ariel. It felt right in a way nothing ever had before. With Dr. Ramirez's guidance, Ariel began the process of transitioning. She started hormone replacement therapy, watching with a mixture of excitement and nervousness as her body slowly began to change. Tender breast buds formed, her skin softened, and her facial hair growth slowed. She threw herself into feminizing workouts, focusing on building curves in her hips and thighs. Hours were spent practicing her voice, working to raise its pitch and adopt more feminine speech patterns. But the physical changes were only part of the journey. Ariel also had to navigate the complex emotions that came with transitioning. There were days of overwhelming joy when she looked in the mirror and finally saw herself looking back. But there were also days of crushing doubt and fear. One particularly difficult evening, Ariel found herself sobbing on her bedroom floor, surrounded by discarded clothing. Nothing fit right. Nothing looked the way she wanted it to. In that moment, the enormity of what she was undertaking hit her full force. Fumbling for her phone, she called the one person she knew would understand.
Dr. Ramirez, I'm sorry to call so late, but I don't know if I can do this.
The therapist's calm voice came through the speaker.
Take a deep breath, Ariel. What you're feeling is normal. This is a big change, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes.
They talked for nearly an hour, Dr. Ramirez gently guiding Ariel through breathing exercises and reminding her of how far she'd already come.
Remember what Cinderella told you?
Dr. Ramirez said as they were wrapping up.
Be yourself. That's what you're doing now, Ariel. You're finally letting your true self shine.
Those words stayed with Ariel as she continued her journey. There were still challenges ahead, coming out to friends and family, navigating the complexities of changing her legal name and gender marker, considering surgical options. But with each passing day, she felt more and more like herself. The pivotal moment came on a warm autumn day, almost a year after that fateful trip to Disney World. Ariel stood in front of her full-length mirror, barely recognizing the person reflected back at her. Gone was the awkward, uncomfortable Nick. In his place stood a confident young woman, her red hair falling in soft waves around her face, her curves accentuated by a flowing sundress. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone and sent a message to her friends. "There's something important I need to tell you all. Can we meet at the park this afternoon?" As she waited for their replies, Ariel's hand drifted to the delicate necklace around her neck, a small silver seashell, a nod to her namesake. She was ready to step into the sunlight, to show the world her true self. In that moment, she thought back to Cinderella's words at Disney World. Be yourself. At long last, Ariel knew exactly who that was. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park as Ariel made her way to the agreed-upon meeting spot. Her heart raced, palms sweaty as she gripped the strap of her purse. This was it, the moment she'd been both dreading and longing for. She spotted her friends gathered around a picnic table, their faces a mixture of concern and curiosity. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from behind a large oak tree and into their line of sight. For a moment, silence reigned. Mia's eyes widened in recognition, her hand flying to her mouth. Chris blinked rapidly, as if not quite believing what he was seeing. "Nick?" he finally managed to choke out. Ariel smiled nervously. "Not Nick anymore. It's Ariel now." She launched into the speech she'd rehearsed countless times, explaining her journey of self-discovery and transformation. As she spoke, she watched her friends' expressions shift from shock to understanding to, finally, acceptance. When she finished, silence fell once again. Then Mia stood up, tears glistening in her eyes, and wrapped Ariel in a fierce hug. "You're so brave," she whispered. "And you look beautiful." One by one, the others followed suit, embracing Ariel and offering words of support. There were questions, of course. There would be many more in the days and weeks to come. But in that moment, all Ariel felt was love and acceptance. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, the group decided to go for ice cream to celebrate. Walking arm in arm with Mia, Ariel felt a lightness she'd never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she was truly herself, inside and out. The ice cream parlor was bustling with families enjoying the warm evening. As they waited in line, Ariel couldn't help but notice a young girl staring at her, wide-eyed. Self-consciousness crept in, and she wondered if the child could tell she was transgender. But then the girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered loudly, "Mommy, look! It's Ariel from The Little Mermaid!" A laugh bubbled up from deep within Ariel's chest, releasing the last of her tension. She winked at the little girl and said in her best princess voice, "You're right. I decided to trade my fins for feet today." The girl's face lit up with delight, and Ariel felt a warmth spread through her chest. In that moment, she realized that living authentically didn't just bring her joy. It had the power to bring magic into others' lives as well. As the weeks passed, Ariel continued to grow more comfortable in her new life. She started hormone replacement therapy, watching with a mixture of excitement and impatience as her body slowly began to align with her true self. There were challenges, of course, awkward conversations with coworkers, the occasional disapproving glance from strangers. But Ariel faced them with a newfound confidence. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves of gold and crimson drifted on the breeze, Ariel stood before her bedroom mirror. She smoothed down the front of her blouse, marveling at the subtle curves that had begun to develop. Her hair, now grown out to her shoulders, framed her face in soft waves. A notification chimed on her phone, and she picked it up to see a message from Mia. "Hey girl, we still on for our Disney trip next month?" Ariel's heart skipped a beat. They'd been planning this return trip for weeks, but suddenly the reality of it hit her. She was going back to the place where her journey had begun, but this time as her true self. "Absolutely," she typed back, her fingers trembling slightly with excitement. "I can't wait." As the day of the trip approached, Ariel found herself filled with a nervous energy. She spent hours planning her outfits, wanting everything to be perfect. The night before their departure, she barely slept, her mind racing with anticipation. Finally, the morning arrived. Ariel donned a Minnie Mouse-inspired dress, complete with polka dots and a red bow in her hair. As she applied her makeup, a skill she'd worked hard to perfect over the past year, she hardly recognized the person staring back at her in the mirror. Gone was the awkward, uncomfortable Nick. In his place stood a confident, radiant young woman. The familiar sights and sounds of Disney World washed over Ariel as she and her friends entered the park. The excited chatter of families, the cheerful music drifting through the air, the towering spires of Cinderella Castle in the distance. It was all just as magical as she remembered. But this time, instead of feeling out of place, Ariel felt like she belonged. She twirled in her dress, laughing as Mia snapped pictures. They rode the teacups, screaming with delight as the world spun around them. In Frontierland, Ariel found herself belting out "Part of Your World" along with the other park guests during a sing-along show. As the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, Ariel's steps slowed as they approached the princess meet-and-greet area. A familiar figure in a shimmering blue gown stood greeting guests. "Do you want to meet Cinderella?" Mia asked, noticing Ariel's hesitation. Ariel nodded, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. They joined the queue, and as they got closer, Ariel's heart began to race. Would Cinderella recognize her? Would she remember their conversation from a year ago? Finally, it was their turn. Cinderella's eyes lit up as she greeted them, her smile as warm and welcoming as Ariel remembered. "Welcome, my dears. I'm so glad you could join us in the kingdom today." Ariel stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you remember me?" Cinderella tilted her head, studying Ariel's face. For a moment, confusion flickered in her eyes. Then suddenly, recognition dawned. "Of course I remember you," she said softly, her voice full of warmth. "You've found your brightest star." Tears welled up in Ariel's eyes as Cinderella pulled her into a gentle hug. In that moment, she felt the full weight of her journey, All the fear, the doubt, the pain, but also the joy and the triumph. "Thank you," Ariel whispered. "Your words that day, they changed my life." As they pulled apart, Cinderella's eyes shimmered with unshed tears of her own.
"No, my dear, you changed your life. You found the courage to be yourself, and that's the greatest magic of all."
They posed for a picture together, Ariel's smile radiant as she stood beside the princess who had unknowingly set her on this path. As they walked away, Mia squeezed Ariel's hand. "You okay?" she asked softly. Ariel nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "I'm more than okay. I'm finally home." As night fell and fireworks burst overhead, painting the sky in a riot of color, Ariel stood with her friends in front of the castle. The crowds around and oohed and awed at the spectacular display, but Ariel's gaze was drawn to her own reflection in a nearby window. She saw a young woman with red hair and a bright smile, her eyes filled with wonder and joy. She saw someone who had faced her fears, embraced her truth, and emerged stronger for it. She saw Ariel, not a Disney princess, but a real person who had found her own kind of magic. As the last sparks faded from the sky, Ariel made a silent vow to herself. She would continue to live authentically, to spread kindness and understanding, and to help others find the courage to be themselves. After all, that was the true spirit of Disney, the belief that dreams really do come true if you have the courage to pursue them. With a contented sigh, Ariel linked arms with her friends and joined the stream of happy parkgoers heading towards the exit. Her journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But as she looked back at the glowing castle one last time, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. Because now, finally, she was the hero of her own story. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Patreon for a lot more content and early access to YouTube videos.